But this process, I promise you, if you do it in front of the mirror, it is going to be 10 times more intentional, and it'll probably stick with you even more because you're going deep into what you actually want to shift about yourself. So of course, don't do it right now because you're watching this video, but right after this video, I want you to do this for today's action item. Welcome back to 0 to 10K, the 25-part series where I'm showing you every single day for the next 25 days how to make $10,000 in your life and in your business. Now, yesterday for day 4, we covered facing your fears, and I am sure some of you guys were a little bit afraid, maybe a little bit of resistant to go out and actually face your fears if it was like the first part of going out there and having a conversation with somebody, or maybe it was sitting in front of the mirror and having a conversation with yourself. Whatever you did, comment below and let us know how you feel now, like after you actually went out there and faced your fear, or even if you just like buckled it in the passenger and in the back seat. Let us know how you are feeling now, because today for day 5, what we are going to focus on is by far one of my favorite parts when it comes to this creation process of becoming somebody who's actually able to attract $10,000 into their life. And today is all about creating your new identity. Now, I might have said this on day 2 when we actually set the intention and goal of making $10,000, which was if you were the person who was already able to achieve your goals, you would have done it already. So that means you actually need to shift your identity, your habits, your thought processes, your beliefs, your actions to be the somebody who's actually able to attract that into his or her life. So today we're really going to dive deep into what this actually looks like what type of identity and what type of person are you actually creating who is able to once again bring that cash and bring that money into his or her life. And I remember for me, I did this when, once again, a few years ago when I was making $500 a month and I wanted to get to $10,000, I took time to actually write down if I was already making $10,000, how would I act? What would I be doing? What are the thoughts that would be going through my mind? How would I dress and show up, right? So for me, when I was making $500 a month, I was doing things that basically had the identity of somebody who was making $500 a month. So I remember I would be working on my business and I would be working with clients, but then for the rest of the time, I would go hang out with my friends and basically just gossip and talk shit about my life and be like, oh, I'm so annoyed that I'm still in Iowa. My clients are so annoying. Oh my gosh, my ex, he's on Facebook, on Instagram, he's traveling with this other girl. I was basically just talking shit about myself, about my life, and I was just hating on where I was at. And I remember when I went through this process of shifting my identity and creating this new version of myself, I thought to myself, I'm wait a minute, if I was actually making $10,000, I would not be talking shit about myself. And more importantly, I wouldn't even be giving the time of day to somebody else who was not even adding to my life, right? So right now, you might, right before this video, you might have had a conversation with a friend or maybe with yourself in your mind that wasn't in alignment with the person who's actually able to attract that into his or her life. And this even comes down to if in your heart and your soul that you are meant to build an online business and you're meant to have a personal brand and post content on social media, but then your friends call you up and they're like, hey, we're actually going out tonight, we're going out to dinner, we're doing this fun thing, but you had a plan at home to create all these videos and do all these things, but instead you go hang out with your friends, you're letting yourself down and you're not actually following the path of the person who is actually able to attract that cash. Now, what I'm about to say might sound a little contradictory, and by now, we're on day 5, so you already know a lot of the times, in order for you to actually understand what I'm trying to say and get my point across, I contradict because I really want you guys to see both ends and both ways of how this is actually going to manifest into your reality. Now, of course, you don't have the identity, the traits, the beliefs to actually attract that cash. Otherwise, once again, you would have done it already. However, you are the person who's actually able to do it. You have not just stepped into the highest version of yourself. Now, a lot of the times people say think of the higher version of yourself. Think of, the version of yourself that already has the goal and the intention. But I always ask myself, what would the highest version of myself be doing? Okay, like what would she be doing throughout the day? What she would be doing like with her friends? What would she be doing after she has lunch? Like what would she actually be doing? So for today, what we're going to do is we're actually going to write down and craft out your new identity. Now, to make this really stick and work for you, I actually want you to do this process in front of a mirror. Now, for some people, this can feel like really resistant because maybe you don't like to look at yourself in the mirror, or maybe you see a lot of the things that your highest self necessarily wouldn't look like or wouldn't think like, wouldn't act like. But this process, I promise you, if you do it in front of the mirror, it is going to be 10 times more intentional, and it'll probably stick with you even more because you're going deep into what you actually want to shift about yourself. So of course, don't do it right now because you're watching this video, but right after this video, I want you to do this for today's action item. Sit in front of the mirror and actually have like a piece of paper and a pen with you. You can do it on your phone if you want to. And look at yourself in the eye and say, what would my highest version be doing, thinking, acting, believing if they were making $10,000? Like, what would you actually see? And the crazy part is you will know the immediate answers. Like, your mind will start to write down, like you will see your hand moving just like this without you even having to think about it because you know. Like, this entire process is not about like identifying this like crazy version of yourself that's not even true, but it's all about unlocking and uncovering a part of you that already exists. Now, a few questions that you want to ask yourself as you're doing this process to really get into like depth and detail of the things that you can start to shift. I'll pop them up right over here on the screen, and I actually have them written down over here, so I'm going to read them off. Ask that version of yourself, what are their thought patterns? So what are they actually thinking about throughout the day? What are their beliefs? What do they believe is true? If you want to make money without working your ass off, like burning yourself to the ground, working, hustling 24/7, but you don't believe that's true right now, guess what? It's going to be hard to actually attract that goal of making $10,000 because you don't believe that you can actually attract that money without hustling yourself 24/7. So you want to really see in the mirror and ask that person, that highest version of you, what are your beliefs? What are their truths, right? What are their habits? How do they dress, right? So maybe right now, every single morning, you're just always in your pajamas. You're always in your robe and you're in your bed doing like work, or you're just on your phone for like 2 hours in the morning, consuming everybody else's content. But you know, if you actually were making $10,000, if you actually had your own business, if you were that CEO version of yourself, you know you would not be sitting in your like bed on your phone just like constantly scrolling and seeing everybody else win, but you're not. You would be out of there, probably in your office or making yourself breakfast and coaching like your clients, or you know, talking to your team members and seeing your own sales come in on your phone instead of everybody else who's living their life. Like, you really want to see and be so clear about what you are doing right now and what the highest version of you would be doing. And then some other things to also ask is like, what do they do throughout the day? What do they prioritize? What do they no longer entertain? This is a big one. If you are somebody who's like a people pleaser, and every single time, like maybe one of your friends, family member, and maybe even people online and social media and your audience comes to you and asks you for something, and you always bend over backwards and give them like the time of the day when you would much rather be working on yourself, like stop entertaining that. We don't want to do that anymore because that is not a match to your goal. That is not a match to the identity that you want to be holding for yourself. So this is a big one. Like, what do you just like no longer entertain anymore? I know for me, when I built my business to a point where I hit multi-six figures, I was doing sales calls. And the majority of people I was doing sales calls with, it was either they were ready to buy or they wanted to pick my brain and they had no intention of buying. So I'm like, okay, I am no longer entertaining people who just want to pick my brain but have no intention of actually committing to themselves and having the transformation. So once I let that go, then all of a sudden I started to attract people who actually wanted to work with me, and I didn't have to like chase them, or I didn't have to persuade them. So what do they no longer entertain, right? And then the last thing is, what do they not carry along with them? Now, a lot of this you might have already released, specifically what we did in day 3 and day 4, because day 3 was all about identifying your blocks, and then yesterday was all about facing your fears, right? So by now, hopefully you should have released a lot of like the blocks and the fears and the resistance that you might have held on to, which is stopping you from actually making the money that you want. But if there's something else that you're just like, you feel like you're carrying along with you, what are you going to let go of? What is just not a part of your future anymore? And you know what that is. It might be something that you are doing to yourself, or it might be something that's happening externally that you can put like a stop to, right? So the highest version of yourself that is making $10,000, even more, $20,000, $30,000, whatever that intention you wrote down for yourself was, what are they not carrying along with them anymore? Remember yesterday and the day before when I'm like, okay, like let go of those fears, buckle them in or face them. If like your fear is buckled in the passenger or in the back seat, you might be bringing it with you, but you're not necessarily entertaining it, right? So these are all the questions that you really want to be asking yourself and you want to be writing down. Now, one last thing that I want to say before we wrap up today's video is when you are writing it down, I want you to state it in a way where it is happening to you already. So sometimes when people are creating their new identity, they will say, I do not wake up late anymore, or I don't spend time with friends that bring me down, or they say, you know, I don't want to work a job anymore. They say all the things that they don't want, but they're not stating it in a way that they already do have. So for an example, if you don't want to work a job anymore, you would say something along the lines of, I have a thriving business where I attract clients and make $10,000 a month. So you're basically stating in the now what your current desire is. Right. So one of the things I wrote down was like, what are the thought patterns that your highest self has? Right now, if you have a thought pattern of, oh, I've tried this so many times and it's not working, you wouldn't write down, I don't have thoughts about it's not working anymore. You would write down, everything I do, I attract, or everything I do, I succeed in. Every time I post, I make a sale. Every time I go live, I get hundreds of new followers. Like, what is the actual desire and what is the end result that your highest version would be doing? Remember, this is the version of you who has already have made $10,000. They have already done it. So there's not really any question around like, oh, is this like, does this sound like too good to be true almost? Because sometimes when you're writing it down, you're like, oh, this sounds like way too good to be true. But remember, it's not, because they are the version of you who has already done it. So for some of you, this might take like an hour, okay? And that's okay. For some of you, it might take a little bit less time, but this is what day 5 is all about. Creating your new identity. So once you have created your new identity, comment below and let us know maybe 1 or 2 things that your highest version of you is going to be doing, right? Is doing right now to attract that cash to you. Because tomorrow for day 6, what we're going to be covering is actually stepping into that new identity and living in that identity. So for today, you don't have to even like worry about or think about, okay, I wrote all these things down, but I have no idea how I'm actually going to be living in that state every single day. Don't worry. Come back tomorrow for day 6, and that is what we're going to be covering. And if you missed day 4 of this 25-part series, which day 4 is all about facing your fears, or you even missed like day 1, 2, or 3, I'm going to link up the playlist for the $0 to $10,000 series so you can go back and watch all of the previous days to make sure that you are caught up on all of them. So that is all for today, day 5, and I will see you guys back here tomorrow for day 6. And until then, make sure that you stay unforgettable.